Imagine living in a world where a simple haircut could trouble your parents, stain your reputation, and even place you on the wrong side of society. In ancient China, hair was never treated like a casual fashion choice. It was sacred. It carried family honor, cultural identity, and deep spiritual meaning. So when people say ancient Chinese never cut their hair, it wasn't just tradition for tradition's sake. It was a serious rule rooted in belief. Today, cutting your hair feels normal, sometimes even refreshing. But back then, scissors could represent disrespect. And the longer your hair was, the more it silently said about you. Your upbringing, your discipline, your social status, and your loyalty to your family line. In this video, we're going to uncover the real reasons behind this powerful tradition, why long hair was tied to morality and honor, and how one dynasty's forced haircuts sparked fear, protest, and unforgettable cultural trauma. By the end, you'll see that in ancient China, hair was not just hair, it was history living on your head. And yes, even warriors and scholars followed this rule strictly. So why would someone refuse to cut hair for their whole life? The first reason starts at home. Ancient Chinese believed your hair was a gift from your parents. In their worldview, your body did not belong to you alone. It came from your father and mother, and by extension, from your ancestors. That belief created a powerful rule. If you damaged your body, you were indirectly dishonoring the people who gave you life. Cutting hair felt like throwing away something precious that was entrusted to you. That is why long hair became a symbol of respect, gratitude, and family loyalty. This thinking shows up clearly in traditional teachings. The body, hair, and skin are received from the parents. One must not dare injure them. In other words, keeping your hair intact was not vanity. It was moral discipline. It was proof that you were raised properly and that you understood your duty to the family line. That's also why hairstyles were maintained with great care. People combed, washed, oiled, and tied their hair carefully, not because they feared being ugly, but because they feared being seen as ungrateful or careless with what their parents gave them. From childhood, many were taught that even a single strand mattered. A careless cut could be seen as rebellion, especially in families that valued tradition and honor. Now, that family-based belief became even stronger because of one major force: Confucianism. Confucius did not just shape Chinese education, he shaped how people understood obedience, respect, and social order. And at the center of Confucian society was one powerful idea called filial piety, known as Xiao. Filial piety meant honoring your parents, caring for them, and never bringing shame to the family name. It wasn't optional, it was the foundation of what it meant to be a good person. And because hair was seen as a physical gift from your parents, protecting it became part of that moral duty. So in Confucian thinking, cutting off your hair could look like disrespect. It could suggest you were careless, stubborn, or ungrateful. Even worse, it could be interpreted as rejecting the authority of your family. That mattered deeply in a society where family hierarchy was everything. This is why many scholars and officials kept long hair and wore it in disciplined styles. Their appearance was part of their character. A neat, well-kept hairstyle silently communicated self-control, education, and honor. In ancient China, morality wasn't only in your words, it was in how you carried yourself, right down to your hair. Confucian culture also treated the body as a sacred responsibility. You were expected to preserve it, train it, and present it properly in public. So a hairstyle was almost like a uniform of virtue. During ceremonies, hair was tied in specific ways to show respect for elders and tradition. This is one reason the simple act of cutting hair felt too extreme, too personal, and too disrespectful to become normal. In ancient China, hair was not just something people had. It was something people displayed with meaning. Your hair was part of your identity, and the way you carried it told the world who you were. That's why long hair was treated like honor itself. To them, a person who kept their hair properly didn't just look clean, they looked disciplined. They looked educated. They looked respectable. And respect mattered deeply in a society built on hierarchy. People judged your character not only by how you spoke or behaved, but also by how you appeared in public. So the hair became a symbol of seriousness. That's also why hairstyles were not random. Men typically tied their hair up into a neat top knot, while women kept long hair styled carefully with pins, combs, or decorative accessories depending on the era. These styles weren't just beauty choices. They were part of social order. A messy look could easily suggest laziness, immaturity, or even disrespect. And it wasn't only about personal pride. It was also about protecting the family name. If you looked careless, people might assume you came from an undisciplined household. In that kind of culture, your hairstyle could reflect not just you, but your parents and ancestors too. So cutting hair was more than a physical change. It could feel like cutting away dignity. It could be interpreted as rejecting tradition, rejecting order, and rejecting the image of a proper person. In ancient China, your hair was your silent reputation. One of the most fascinating things about ancient Chinese culture is this. People could read your life story just by looking at your hair. Your hairstyle revealed important details about you, your age, your gender role, your responsibilities, and even your social status. For example, children usually wore simpler hair arrangements. But as a person matured, the hair was expected to be tied up and styled in a more formal way. That change was not only aesthetic, it symbolized discipline, growth, and readiness to take on adult responsibilities. In many dynasties, it was almost like society saying, "You're no longer a child, you must now behave like one of us." For men, tying the hair into a top knot was common, often secured with a hairpin or headwear, depending on rank. For women, hairstyles became even more complex. Their hair could be braided, layered, arranged into elaborate shapes, and decorated with ornaments. And the details often mattered because hairstyles could indicate whether a woman was unmarried, married, or of noble status. Class also played a role. Wealthier families could afford finer hair accessories such as the jade pins, gold ornaments, silk ribbons, beautifully carved combs. Ordinary people still kept long hair, but their tools were simpler and their styles were more practical. Even so, the expectation remained. Your hair should show that you respect yourself and your household. So when we say ancient Chinese never cut their hair, it becomes clearer now. Hair was not only personal, it was social communication. It was a cultural badge. It was the difference between being seen as refined or reckless. That's why people worked hard to protect their hair. Once cut, it wasn't just a style change. It was like losing a major part of your identity in society. Now let's talk about the moment when hair became more than a belief. In ancient China, the transition into adulthood was marked with a powerful tradition known as the coming-of-age ceremony. And yes, hair played a central role in it. This ceremony wasn't just symbolic, it was a serious cultural announcement. It told everyone that a young person was no longer a child. They were now expected to carry responsibility, represent their family, and behave with maturity. For young men, this often involved the formal tying of the hair into an adult-style top knot, secured with a pin or cap. It might sound simple today, but in that era, it was profound. It wasn't just styling, it was like stepping into manhood, publicly and culturally. For young women, the tradition also came with hair rituals, sometimes involving changes in hairstyle that reflected readiness for adult duties and, in many cases, marriage. The hair was carefully arranged to represent grace, discipline, and social readiness. What makes this especially important is this. The ceremony proves that ancient Chinese didn't see long hair as childish. They didn't see it as something to cut off when growing up. Instead, they believed adulthood meant learning how to manage and carry your hair properly. So rather than cutting, they tied. Rather than removing, they refined. The hair stayed, but the meaning evolved. And once a person went through this ceremony, their hairstyle became a daily reminder of their new identity. Every time they tied their hair, they were reminded that they now represented more than themselves. In ancient China, adulthood wasn't only about age, it was about how you presented yourself to society, starting from your head. Another powerful reason ancient Chinese avoided cutting their hair is because haircutting was often associated with humiliation. In many historical periods, a person did not voluntarily shave or cut their hair unless something serious had happened. So instead of seeing a haircut as self-care, many people saw it as a sign of disgrace. In traditional society, a person's appearance represented their dignity. So when authorities punished someone, they sometimes targeted that dignity by altering the person's body or hair. Shaving, cutting hair, or forcing a person to wear their hair in a humiliating way could be used to mark them as dishonored. It was a public message that this person had fallen from respect. That created fear. People didn't just love long hair for beauty. They loved it because it protected their image. It kept them looking whole, respectable, and socially acceptable. Once hair was cut, it could immediately change how people looked at you. Neighbors could whisper, families could feel embarrassed. The individual could feel permanently marked. So in that world, hair was like social armor. It helped you keep face, keep dignity, and keep the respect of your community. And that's why many people guarded their hair carefully. It wasn't only about tradition, it was also about avoiding shame. This connection between hair and punishment strengthened the cultural resistance to cutting hair, making it feel dangerous, disgraceful, and socially risky. Now this is where the story becomes truly intense, because one moment in Chinese history turned hair into a battlefield. During the Qing Dynasty, the Manchu rulers imposed one of the most controversial hair policies ever forced on the Han Chinese population. It wasn't a suggestion or a trend, it was a command. Men were ordered to shave the front of the head and grow the rest into a long braid called the queue. On the surface, it sounds like a simple hairstyle change, but culturally it was a painful demand. For many Han Chinese men, shaving the head violated a core belief. Hair was inherited from one's parents and should not be harmed. That is why the queue became a symbol of submission. It wasn't only about appearance, it was about political loyalty. The rule was so strict that refusal could lead to death. That alone shows how high the stakes were. Imagine the psychological pressure. A man could live his whole life believing his long hair represented family honor, then suddenly be forced to shave it to prove obedience. This created fear, anger, grief, and resistance. Rebellions broke out not because people were obsessed with style, but because cutting hair felt like betrayal, not just of oneself, but of ancestors. Even those who complied often did so to survive, while resenting it deeply. This moment matters because it proves how powerful hair culture was in China. It could trigger unrest and lasting trauma. The Qing queue policy shows clearly that hair was never just hair. It represented pride, freedom, identity, and cultural survival. In a way, politics literally reached into every household, onto every head. While men's hair was tied to honor and loyalty, women's hair carried its own deep meaning. In ancient China, a woman's long hair was often seen as the crown of her beauty. But beyond beauty, it symbolized femininity, purity, and virtue. Long, healthy hair represented self-discipline and proper upbringing. Women were expected to care for their hair with patience and skill. Washing, combing, oiling, braiding, pinning, and styling it into traditional forms. This daily process wasn't only to look attractive, it was part of cultural etiquette. It showed elegance, respect, and readiness for social roles. Hair could also reflect marriage and maturity. For example, certain hairstyles were associated with unmarried girls, while married women could wear different styles that signaled their new status. This made hair almost like a quiet language that society understood. And because long hair was linked to beauty and virtue, cutting it could be seen as shocking, careless, or even emotionally symbolic. It could signal grief, punishment, or loss. So women also held onto their hair not just because of tradition, but because it was tied to how society measured grace and honor. In short, for women too, hair was never casual. It was cultural identity, social respect, and beauty wrapped into one. Now here's a question that may surprise you. What if long hair in ancient China wasn't inconvenient at all, but actually practical? Many people today assume long hair must have been difficult to handle, especially for workers, travelers, soldiers, and everyday families. But ancient Chinese people didn't leave their hair loose and messy. They styled it with purpose. Hair was usually tied up, wrapped, pinned, braided, or covered with headwear, depending on the time period and social class. For men, a top knot wasn't just tradition, it was efficiency. It kept hair secure, out of the eyes, and manageable during daily duties. For women, braids and structured styles reduced tangling and helped keep hair clean and protected. And because people valued grooming deeply, they developed routines that made long hair feel normal. Even in physical labor, long hair could still be controlled. Simple cloth wraps, pins, and caps helped keep hair neat and safe. So instead of cutting hair for convenience, society developed ways to carry hair properly. This is important because it removes the modern misconception that people avoided cutting hair purely out of stubborn tradition. It wasn't just belief, it was also lifestyle. Their long hair fit into their daily lives because they built a whole culture around managing it. So long hair wasn't a burden, it was a skill, a discipline, and in many ways it was a quiet form of refinement. So the big question becomes, if ancient Chinese were deeply committed to long hair, how did cutting hair become normal? The change didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually as China moved into the modern era. One major reason was modernization. As China opened up to Western influence, new ideas about hygiene, fashion, and identity spread, especially in cities. For many people, short hair began to represent a modern, educated, progressive lifestyle. Politics also played a huge role. Hair had already been politicized during the Qing Dynasty, so later generations understood that hairstyles could symbolize loyalty, rebellion, reform, or national identity. When dynasties collapsed and new governments emerged, people started changing hairstyles to reflect a new era in a new image. Then came war and crisis, which pushed people toward practicality. In difficult times, simpler grooming was easier, and survival often mattered more than tradition. Education and work culture reinforced this shift. Schools, the military, and workplaces promoted neat, uniform appearances, and short hair was easier to maintain. Over time, the strict belief that cutting hair was disrespectful began to fade. Most importantly, younger generations began seeing hair less as sacred inheritance and more as personal expression. This didn't make Chinese culture weaker, simply showed that society was evolving. So now you understand the real reason ancient Chinese never cut their hair. It wasn't just tradition, it wasn't just appearance, it was loyalty to parents, moral discipline, social identity, and cultural pride. Hair was a symbol of gratitude. It was proof of upbringing. It was a silent language that showed maturity, class, and honor. And when rulers tried to control it, like in the Qing Dynasty, the conflict became emotional and even deadly because people weren't just defending hair, they were defending identity. Now here's a deep question to leave you with. If something as simple as hair could carry this much meaning, what modern-day small thing do you think we take lightly today that future generations might see as sacred? If you enjoyed this kind of cultural deep dive, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications because the next one will uncover even more surprising traditions people misunderstand today. Thank you for watching.